Look, I get asked all the time, to either define regenerative agriculture, or people are commenting about how there is no definition and it changes. Well, the way I look at it is like this, is that the definition does change. But if I had to wrap it into something, what I always say is this, is that, look, regenerative means you're bettering the soil tomorrow than where it is today. Now, how you define better, again, that's a little up to you, right? But when you get up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I'm going to try to be a little better today than I was yesterday. Whether that's you're going to exercise or eat a little different or take time to spend more time with your kid, whatever it is, however you're going to define that. But really, in a nutshell, it's just about taking a step forward for your farm. And how that needs to happen and how we measure it then is a little dependent upon your definition as a grower or as a company, as a consultant. And that's the approach we try to take.
Well, but with inputs that you're putting in to make that system better, you really have to think twice. Is it going to make me better next year? Is it an investment into my farm, or is it just a direct expense that I really have no, extra benefit as years to come?
Sure. Well, and even with the testing itself, they can, soil tests can be just another cost that gets you nothing, because if you're not aligning the test with your goals, it doesn't do you any good. I'm an analogy person. You're going to hear a lot of them today, but if you wake up in the morning and your shoulder hurts and it's been hurting for months, and you go to the doctor and they take an x-ray of your knee, well, they're running tests, but they're missing the whole point, right? And so you're wasting your money, you're wasting your time. And the reason we really try to get people to define regenerative agriculture for themselves and lay out their goals is because we really want to try to provide tests that are going to impact those goals. It's not just to collect data. I could do that all day long. But at that point, it's just another input cost to you as a grower. And
why the standard salt extraction, traditional soil test, right? For years, that was the only thing was, ever ran. And it often really fails to show the whole picture of nutrient availability, right? So if you could, can you just kind of explain the problem with the traditional soil sample?
Well, before I say this, let me point out, those tests were helpful. They got us somewhere in the world of agriculture. If you go clear back into the 40s and 50s, after years of nutrient removal, growing crops, fertilizers, soil testing to determine fertilizer application, it helped. It helped agriculture. It increased production. There was a lot of good that came out of that. We can say the same thing about the original telephone, but times change, technology changes, the science and understanding changes, but the testing has stayed the same, right? And so it's not that those tests are not useful in certain situations or anything like that, but they have limitations. And primarily, those tests were following the idea that your soil operates as a chemistry set. So when we talk about chemistry, if you've ever taken chemistry classes, it's all about controlling the ratios of different things in a beaker, the temperature, and all of these things in order to get this reaction to happen. Well, the reaction we want to happen in agriculture is that we're going to add all of these inputs into the beaker, and the soil is the beaker, and then we want this reaction to happen where the plants take up these nutrients and produce this crop. Well, you're dealing with a biological system. And so when we just focus on nitrate and phosphate and ionic potassium and calcium, etc., we're kind of missing the idea. We're kind of missing the idea. Now, the analogy here is is the human gut. You know, for years we thought, well, if you just eat nutritious food, if you take vitamins, you know, your small intestine absorbs all of that stuff and makes you healthy. That's how, now your small intestine there is the plant roots. You know, we put all this stuff on, the plant roots just suck all this stuff up, and we've got this healthy plant. Well, that's not really how it works, right? Your small intestine is where the microbes live, and the microbes control the uptake and flow of nutrients. And yes, they need to be fed good things. That's why fiber is so pushed in diets anymore, right? Fiber, because really, you don't need fiber. You're feeding the microorganisms. And so it's this whole process. And I always say the soil is the gut of the system. And so, yes, what we put into the gut is going to dictate what comes out. So the issue with some of these tests is that we're only really measuring nutrition like looking at a multivitamin. Fertilizers are multivitamins. We're going to add the N, the P, the K, the iron, the whatever it is. Well, that doesn't really mean you're going to get good absorption, right? You're not going to translocate that into the plant. We got to focus more on the microbes because they're the ones that are doing this work. Now, with that being said, do we still need to make sure that there is phosphorus in the system? Sulfur? Absolutely. You know, and the big difference in an ag system versus a native system is that we have huge amounts of nutrient removal.
Absolutely.